Welcome to the Convergence Coaching Inspired Ideas podcast. Join us as we explore great leadership and management ideas that apply within the accounting profession and in other aspects of life and business too.
Welcome, everyone, to the Inspired Ideas podcast by Convergence Coaching. And my name is Renee Mulders. I'm a consultant with Convergence Coaching. And I'm here today with Justin Hayes. Justin is a director at KSM in Indianapolis. And Justin was in the 2018-19 class of our TLP. That's when we met him. And we are going to learn a little bit more today about what he and the firm are doing with remote auditing. So if you've been listening and you've heard some of our podcasts, we've been talking about anytime, anywhere work, flexible work, remote work. And we're really excited about those programs because they give team members more options, more control over where and when the work gets done. And so remote auditing is interesting. It's like it gives us the where option. But what we're talking about is that maybe we're not always going to go on site with the client to do the work. And so that's what Justin and I are going to tackle today. They're doing some innovative things, and we wanted to learn a little bit more about that. So, Justin, I want to start with what inspires you most in your life or work?
I think when I take a look at what inspires me, it really draws back to my family and taking care of and providing my family. And so, that's kind of the first driving point is I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to provide everything my family needs, to provide my kids with a good life and to provide them with the resources that they need to be successful and to become successful. And then I think the other part that inspires me is just helping individuals. It's maybe a different outlook on the audit, but I try to kind of think in my auditing, I've got a skill set that I've learned over the years that I can utilize to help my clients so that my clients can focus on running their business, which is what they need to do. And they can focus on the operations of their business and can use my skill set to kind of help augment that in the accounting and the reporting area.
I really enjoyed hearing about that, Justin. I wonder how you got interested in remote auditing and how that's going for you and your firm today.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So for me, the idea of remote auditing came around the fact that I was traveling quite a bit. I had team members that were traveling quite a bit. And, it's stressful when you're gone, you're away from family a lot, you're traveling, you're cutting into your weekends in order to be able to make flights. And so part of the thought was, is there a way that we can figure out to reduce some of that travel time that doesn't really add any value to anything? Reduce the amount of time that our staff are having to spend in airports, reduce the amount of time that our staff are having to spend, in hotel rooms. And so that kind of drove it. And then there was also kind of a discussion around, just cost and taking a look at, what kind of costs are incurred during the actual travel phase itself of an audit. And is that in any way limiting the firm's ability to pick up clients that are outside of where kind of our home office is, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. So how did you get the ball rolling then? You had this idea, came across this. How did you get it started?
Yeah, it really started with just one client in particular of mine that is about a 3 to 3.5 hour drive from here. But at that point in time, they were in an area that was, you were driving through a lot of old country roads to be able to get out to this client. It was not the easiest place to find a hotel to stay at. And then, you basically had one restaurant that you could eat at the entire time you were there. And it was a larger client, a good sized client. And the controller at this client is, I would say, a younger individual, late 20s, early 30s. And he and I were kind of talking. He's like, man, he's like, a lot of these files I can just send to you guys. Like, what do you think about, if I send files over to you and you take a look at them kind of beforehand, and then maybe we can reduce the amount of time you're here. And that kind of sparked the idea. And, as I kind of thought through that and it logically makes sense, but I kind of took it that next step and I said, well, if you can send us stuff to kind of reduce the time, what if you send us the stuff and in some ways we completely eliminate the time that we need to be on site? And so kind of talked with him and he really liked that concept and the idea of, kind of working remotely. And so we utilized software. We utilized Zoom. And so we use Zoom to be able to do video conferencing with them. And it allows us to still chat with them. We can have the FaceTime. With Zoom, we can share our screens. So we can kind of pull up files and be able to share that. So he's seeing the exact file we're looking at. And in a lot of ways, it really makes it as if we're still on site working hand in hand. It's just rather than being in the conference room that's right next to him, we're in a conference room that's here at our office.
Mm-hmm.
We still have people go out on site, but we significantly reduced it. So, instead of having to, for example, have 2 staff and a senior travel for 5 days, and then my manager's going out for maybe 2 days, instead I've got the manager going out for 2 days, and maybe I'm coming along with that manager. And so we're still getting on site and we're doing what we need to do physically on location. We're still getting time to spend with the client, but we're still significantly reducing the time that our staff are having to travel.
Mm-hmm. And taking along that whole team, Justin, which I think is, we make this assumption, we talk about the value to the client of us being on site, but is it really that whole team sitting in that conference room all week? Or, is that really where the value lies?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's definitely something to be said for getting time with the client one-on-one where you can talk in person. But the entire team being there, I don't know what kind of value that brings. And what was really interesting to me is we went through kind of piloting it with this individual. We took a very structured approach to it. So we said, okay, we are going to do this audit remotely. So we're going to stay here at our offices in Indianapolis, and we're going to kind of connect with you remotely. But in doing that, we were very structured. And so we said, okay, we're going to have a call at 10 a.m. and a call at 2:30 p.m. every day with you. And that call might be just 5-10 minutes of, hey, here's kind of what we've gotten through so far. No big issues have come up. We're keeping on pace with where we expect to be. We'll plan on touching base again, on the next call. Or that call might end up being like an hour and a half long as we kind of worked through an issue that had popped up. But it kind of created a structured approach for our communication during field work with the client. And after we completed it, I thought it was interesting because that individual client came back to me and said, I actually like the remote aspect better. He said, because I could plan my day. I've still got to do my day-to-day job, even though the audit's running on. And I could plan my day and get everything done I need to because I knew the exact times that we were going to be talking throughout the day. And so I think that he really enjoyed the structure of that as well because he could still get everything done and not get behind on his personal work, even though the audit was going on and was getting completed. And he was still addressing the questions we had, working through any issues that we'd brought to him at the same time.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that starts to inform how we do those on-premise audits. Are we going to change the structure of those as a result of what we're learning and sort of winning on over in the remote audit area? It's going to be very interesting, Justin. And I don't know if you're seeing any of that already.
Well, I think it is interesting. I think as a firm, we try to be cognizant of our clients' time and try to be respectful of that. But it is very easy when you're sitting there on site to think, well, this will just take a couple seconds. I'm just going to run in and ask him real quick, or him or her real quick. But in doing that, we are distracting them, and then we're pulling them away from the work that they're trying to do at that point in time. And, they've got to take the time to get back up to speed from having been interrupted. And while initially that might not seem like too big of a deal, I mean, it does build up over that week. And so if you've kind of got those set times that are structured for when you're going to communicate, I think it helps out. And I could see that type of approach being taken more so even on site, where we're kind of structuring out, here's when we plan to communicate, and here's when you're going to be able to set aside time to kind of talk through items and issues with us that we uncover during the audit.
Mm-hmm. So you shared about this first client that you piloted with, and then where did it go from there?
Well, from there, it was really saying, okay, this seemed to be very successful with this first client. We liked it a lot. My staff absolutely loved the concept because, again, rather than being off-site for 5 days in a very small town in Indiana with, like I said, limited hotel, limited restaurants, and limited really anything, they were able to still get home each night and be able to see family, be able to see spouses, continue on with kind of their normal activities they might have throughout the evenings. And so they enjoyed that. The client really liked it from the feedback that he provided to us. And so then it was kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, what other clients could we try this on? We've got one success. Now let's see if we can replicate that. Is it success because this is a model that's going to work, or did we get lucky? And so I kind of went back to the drawing board and kind of looked at my client base and said, all right, I've tried it on one and it worked. Now I want to try it on at least 3 more and see if it'll work on those 3. And so we kind of just gradually kept spreading it. And for the most part, I'd say it was successful in the scenarios where we've tried it. There's definitely things that we've kind of learned along the way, but overall, our clients that we do our remote auditing on seem to be very happy with it. And I feel that I've built a very strong relationship with those clients. Right or wrong, I think at times we as CPAs will rely on field work to be the time we build relationship with our clients and our customers. But when I've got the remote scenario, I know I'm only going to be on site for a very limited time. And so I think it forces me to be more intentional throughout the entire year to reach out and have communication with that individual. And I think that's because maybe I'm a little bit hypersensitive. One of the concerns, one of the objections that kind of came up as we were talking about this internally was, well, can you still build a relationship with the client? I mean, if we're not there, we're not on site, how are we going to build a relationship with the client and get to know them and they get to know us? And so that was kind of from the beginning, that was always the biggest argument. And so I think I've maybe been a little, like I said, hypersensitive to that, which forces me to be more intentional, and it forces me to think through more. Okay, when was the last time I talked to this individual? Was it a meaningful conversation? Is there anything else I could be providing to that individual? So I feel in some of the remote audits, it's almost been creating an opportunity to build a stronger relationship faster because it is more intentional.
Mm-hmm. I love that word, intentional, that I'm doing it with purpose. I'm strategizing about it versus just kind of doing it by accident or unintentionally. So I just love the way you describe that. So you said adoption is good and hasn't been tough. How about selling it when you go to a client for the first time to talk to them about it? How is that?
Yeah, I think it's important to note as we dive into there. I mean, remote auditing is not for every client. There's no doubt about that at all. There are some clients that it does not make sense for. And so when we're taking a look at doing a remote audit, we do try to evaluate that client on a variety of things. What's the driver for the remote audit? Is it because there's significant amount of travel time? That's typically our driver. And then we take a look at the client itself. Does this feel like something that the client would be comfortable with? Is it something that the client we think would like? Is there benefits to it? Does the client have the technical capabilities to be able to utilize, Zoom or any other technologies that we're using to communicate? And so there's kind of an evaluation that we go through before we do reach out to a client to see if they would be interested. But once we've gone through that evaluation, we have determined we think this client would be a good fit for remote auditing, then it's usually a phone call from me or from the partner on the account. And it's hey, we're thinking about kind of taking a different approach to the audit this year. And we've tried this on several other clients, and we've found it's really beneficial. And one of the things that we think is it really helps for you to be able to manage your time better, because we're going to be more focused and more structured in our communication with you during the audit. And, we're going to have set times that we're going to be communicating with you. And as we kind of work through that, we really try to highlight the benefits to them through the remote audit and kind of sell it in that fashion, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So you have a story to tell about it now, now that you've done it a few times, a successful story.
Yeah, and I think that that's really kind of comes out as we're talking with the clients, and as they start to see the benefit. I think we all build good relationships with our clients, but I don't think that there's any client that gets excited to think, oh, it's audit week. I can't wait till the auditors are here. And so, as they kind of get a feel for, hey, maybe the audit won't be quite as disruptive to their day-to-day life, and they're still going to be able to get the different tasks done that they need to get done, they see that benefit. I think that they appreciate the fact that we're trying to be respectful of their time and their efforts as well.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Justin, I worked with a client who does a lot of remote service work. They're not doing audit work, but they're doing accounting work, and they're in a really niched environment. And so they're working with clients around the country, places, not dictating it at all. It's really that specialty that they have. And so they are looking for willingness, but also just saying, we're going to teach you how to do it if you don't know how to do it yet. So like on the technology side, you're looking for that willingness and that technological ability. And they're pushing that whole conversation and even saying sometimes, we'll buy the equipment for you. So you don't have a webcam? Well, we'll just provide you with a webcam. You don't have a Zoom subscription. We're going to include a Zoom subscription in the cost of our package so that you have that available to you. So, that you're not there yet, but some firms are really pushing that conversation a little bit harder.
And I think there's a lot of benefit to that. I mean, the ability to kind of perform the audit in this fashion, it does change the way the audit's done. And so far, I've seen only positives from that. I've seen the positives on our side. I've seen the positives on the client's side. So the more that we're able to kind of push that model out, I think the more benefit there is for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And you and I talked about how in your environment where you are, the commute is just not that big of a deal. And so maybe, you're pushing it to these clients that are out of town. But for firms that are in larger cities, like where I am, Boston or Los Angeles, New York City, I would imagine this is progressing faster for them because it's not just about where's that client, but how long is it taking my people to get there every day?
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I mean, I'm fortunate in Indianapolis that, my longest commute's maybe 45 minutes. And that's on a bad day when traffic's really heavy, so to speak. So I'm lucky in that regard, but I would agree in bigger markets, I think that can have a big impact. And I think the real benefit there is just it helps prevent that burnout. If you've got staff or seniors that are spending 2 to 3 hours a day in their car, that's a lot of time that's kind of unproductive time, whether it's time they could be working or that's time they could be spending with their families. And that, I think, just helps kind of build into that burnout that you see in public accounting.
Totally. Yes, that's right. Well, so what were the changes in audit approach or technology required to make this work?
It's an interesting conversation. And the neat thing about this is that initially for startup, there was very little change at all. The main thing on startup was just utilizing some type of video conferencing. And so, like I said, as a firm, we opted to use Zoom to be able to do that. For some of our individuals, we utilize just the video webcams that are built into their computers. For other individuals that are doing more of the remote audits, we have gotten equipment that they can utilize that's a little bit better. We have several of our conference rooms over the last few years that we've built in with Zoom capabilities into the conference room. And we try to utilize those for our remote audits because it allows the entire team then to be able to kind of communicate with the client or the individual at the client rather than just one-on-one communication. But initially starting off, it was just our laptops that had the cameras built into them and then using Zoom to start that remote audit process.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As we move forward, I definitely see changes occurring, but I think a lot of those changes occurring are kind of across the board in auditing in general, where, we see a push towards using different technologies such as AI or data mining techniques to kind of dig into the details in a different way than maybe an audit has in the past. And I think that all of the technologies that we've kind of looked at or we've maybe piloted as a firm or as a firm we're involved in the development of, I think all of those just continue to support the idea of remote auditing. And while it's a fairly easy process now, I think it continues to make it even easier going forward.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I'll tell you, whenever we talk about remote service delivery or remote auditing, when we write about it, we get a lot of mail back. People say, that's crazy. Or if we speak at a conference about it, and you say that term remote auditing, we're not going to go on site anymore. People's faces scrunch up and their brows all crinkled. And I mean, they're just maybe upset, confronted by this idea. This, the value of that on-site audit is a really strong held belief in public accounting. And so I wonder, how has adoption been inside your firm with your partner group, with your leaders?
I think the key there is that I think there's a big misconception when we hear the term remote audit. Before people have time to kind of dig in and hear what an individual is saying when they present on remote audit, I think that switch flips in their mind. They hear remote audit and they think, there's no way, that's not going to work for me. How can I do an audit if nobody ever goes on site? But the key is we are not doing any remote audits where there is no individual going on site at all. There are still people that are going on site, but the amount of time on site and the amount of individuals going is significantly reduced. So if we think about kind of let's say a plain vanilla audit of a manufacturing company, and maybe I've got 2 staff, a senior, a manager, and the partner on that engagement. Historically, before we looked at a remote audit environment, I probably would have sent my 2 staff and my senior staff out for 5 days to do that audit, which means they probably would have flown out on Sunday night. That way they could start and hit the ground running Monday morning. And then they might have flown back really late Friday night, or if not, Saturday morning. So while they're only on the client for 5 days, it's really impacting their personal life for 7 days. And then I've got the manager who's probably going out for at least 2 days. And again, depending on flight schedules, is really cutting into evening time or is creating a really early morning to get up to fly and get on site. And then we've got the partner who's probably spending at least a day on site and is incurring that travel time to get out there that's impacting his personal time in his life. So now we take a step back and we say, okay, so I had, 5 individuals that are traveling pretty intensively to be able to get this audit completed. Well, now we're going to go into a remote environment. And so in that remote environment, now my 2 staff and my senior staff are all going to work from the office in still a team setting. I think it's important to note that when we do our remote auditing, the team still meets and works together. It's not the individuals sitting at their individual office or cubicles and kind of crunching through everything. They're reserving space that's been set aside for our remote audits so that they're still collaborating that entire time. But they're now working, from a conference room in our office, which means they're not having to travel on Sunday. They're not having to travel late on Friday night or into Saturday. And they're still getting the 5 days to spend to work on that client in focused time. Now, my manager is probably still going to travel, but again, he's going to travel significantly less. He's probably going to look at spending a day on site rather than spending 2 days on site. And so that might mean flying out late one evening so he's got a full day, but now it's 1 day instead of being out there for 2 days. And our partner is probably still going to look at a day out there similar to where he's been at in the past. But now I've got 2 individuals that are traveling to the client for a day, day and a half, versus 5 individuals, 3 of which were on site for 5 days. So when I look at that remote audit, there's still people that are going to be on site. And really the people that are going to be on site are your relationship builders. It's your managers, your partners, your directors, your senior managers that are going to be spending the time on site and building that relationship still in a lot of ways in the same way that they did before the remote environment. But we're significantly saving time for our staff and our senior staff and not having that travel time. So when I think of remote audits, it's one of the first things that I want to clarify with people is that it's not that I am never going to have any time with the client. I'm never going to see the client. I'm never going to be physically on site. Those things are still going to happen. With a manufacturer, a lot of times we've still got inventory observations that are occurring. Now we've started piloting the idea of remote inventory observations and seeing where there's opportunities for that. But by and large right now, for the most part, there are still physical inventories that are going on. So again, it's still time that you're spending on site with the client at that point in time. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the biggest hurdle to me that you've got to get people past is realizing it's not just completely off site. Nobody's ever there.
And I'm just curious, I bumped into you there, Justin, because when you said remote inventory observation, I was wondering if you're looking at drones and cameras and those types of tools to do that with.
Yeah, as a firm, the drones I think are a really neat concept. What we've looked at more so is video conferencing during the inventory count and seeing if there's opportunities to kind of be able to do the counts that way. There's some challenges, and it's something that we're still kind of piloting right now. We haven't gotten... we're not bought in 100% to the idea of being able to do it. But it's again, something that we're trying to evaluate because if I have a manufacturer that maybe has production occurring in 6 different locations, now I've got people that, depending on the inventory at those locations and what needs counted, I could potentially have 6 individuals that are having to travel to 6 different places to do a 4-hour inventory count. And a lot of times in that scenario, the travel time is way more than the actual count time that's being spent. And so it's kind of looking for, again, it's an area that we saw that, is creating a lot of travel time for our staff. And so is there a way that we can kind of work to figure out a remote way to do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you talked about approaching your clients, I asked you about buy-in on that side, and you said you have a story to tell. And so I wonder if you're developing that story also internally, as you're selling this internally to various partners, how that's evolving for you.
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely a selling side of it to the partners internally, and a lot of times it's that success story. It's, hey, we've done this with multiple clients at this point in time. Here's the positive feedback that I've gotten from the clients on this, and I think that's really has a big influence on the partners as far as being able to look and see, okay, these are actual clients that have now communicated back to us that they liked this setup. It was helpful for them. It was more convenient for them. It allowed them to be more structured in their approach. And I can see we still got the audit issued. We still had high quality on that audit. If there were issues that popped up during the audit, we were still able to work through them with the client. And so having that kind of success story and that client feedback, I think makes it a lot easier to present this to a partner. The other thing internally that I always try to make sure to do is I come to the partner with a very clear plan of how I am going to do the remote audit with that specific client. There's never a scenario where I'm kind of popping into a partner's office and saying, hey, I kind of thought maybe we'd remote audit company ABC. What's your take on that? Because again, I think it just instinctively throws up we can't do a remote audit. Like, we're not going to be on site. We're not going to see them. We're not going to be, how are we going to get the work done? How can we do the testing? It just immediately throws up those barriers. Versus if I can walk in and say, hey, as I was kind of thinking through client ABC, I think there might be a better way that we can serve that client. And here's kind of the structured approach that I have for how we could serve that client. And so a lot of times when I present it internally, I try not to even use the terminology remote audit. I kind of present it more as, hey, I'm really looking to see, is there a better way we can serve this client? And here's a better way that I think we can serve them.
I love it. Well, and I'm wondering, you're the champion of this. You're the sort of the passionate party at KSM that's driving it forward. And so what is in place for others to educate them, to help them be successful in piloting this and doing this with their clients?
Yeah, it's been interesting because it kind of started off with me with one of our clients, and it has grown. And at this point in time, I'd say we've got several people that are champions of it. And it's really kind of pushed by, I would say it's pushed by the senior manager, director level individuals, but it's typically pushed by them as they're taking a look at their staff and the commitment hours that their staff have to jobs, especially during, busy season when we're all working a lot of hours and we're away from family a lot. As they're kind of evaluating their jobs and they're looking to try to make sure that they're doing the most that they can to ease that burden on their staff. That's really where that question pops up. And, as people have talked and as we've had success in the area of doing these remote audits, individuals start to kind of question, well, hey, is this something that I could do for my clients? It seems like that worked really well for his clients. Can I kind of take the same model and use it on mine? And so one of the things that I have tried to do is kind of create a best practices guide. And so I wouldn't say it's a firm policy, but it's kind of hey, here's the typical structured approach that we take when we're doing a remote audit. And here's the things during a remote audit that we've been very successful with. Here's some of the challenges that we've ran into during a remote audit, or here's some of the things we try to stay away from as we're doing a remote audit. And so again, kind of a best practice guide that, a director or a manager who maybe hasn't done a remote audit before can kind of have as a starting point if it's something that they're interested in. And then outside of that, it's just providing training. So, if an individual wants to do remote auditing, then I'm happy to sit down with them and kind of talk about their individual client, why they think it would be good for that client, kind of help them build that structure and that strategy for how they'll deliver it.
So what's next then, Justin, as you think about 2020 and evolving this? Do you have any plans?
Yeah, I think the big thing right now is, again, it's looking at the technology that we are using. we're successful in the remote audits. And so I definitely want to continue to evaluate our client base and see where that makes sense and where we can implement those techniques. But a lot of the push, I think, during 2020 is going to be looking at the technology that we're using, and specifically the technology we're using to do the audits themselves. We've gotten involved with the dynamic audit solution with the AICPA, and that's a package that I think will be very helpful in a remote audit environment. We utilize ProSystems Engagement, which is a centralized database for the audits. And so that means that individuals have got to check out the rights to edit those work papers. With a web-based or a cloud-based, then everybody has the rights at the same time. And as an individual is making updates to a work paper, it's immediately accessible to everybody else on the team. So the other thing that means from a remote environment is that, if my team's working on something that's a remote audit and they're here in the conference rooms at the office, and maybe I am off-site, either an off-site at a client location in town, or maybe I am traveling to one of our remote clients and spending my day and a half out there. With that cloud environment, I can jump on right away and I can see the work papers. I can see where they're at. If they've got issues, I can take a look at it with them, versus where right now we've got to create packages and we've got to send those packages over. A lot of times those packages are large in data, so it's figuring out the mechanism to share the files. And so it just creates a little bit more cumbersome to the remote audit, where in that cloud-based environment, it's accessible to everybody anywhere as long as there's an internet connection.
Yeah, and as you were talking about how we're still all getting together in a conference room and doing this work in a collaborative manner, I think there are organizations out there that are being collaborative, but they're not all together in the same room. So, it's like a Zoom call, like the Zoom calls we did on the TLP, and you'd have 26 TLP leaders plus the 2 facilitators, and we're all looking at each other's faces and talking to each other and chatting back and forth and working, while we're also on video together. So, there is some of that going on. It's a little bit hard for me to picture that. It's a little bit like, my son playing video games and his friends online. And I think, friends, you've never met them 3-dimensionally. And he says, Mom, why do I need to meet them 3-dimensionally? So it's just interesting where all this is going. It's kind of fun.
It is interesting. And I think the other component of that you kind of have to touch on is the training of staff. And so it's kind of similar to the clients. I think we take for granted the training that occurs for our staff during field work. And that's a very important part of an individual's development. But again, if I'm in kind of that remote environment, I think I become almost hypersensitive to, is my staff getting the training they need? Are we addressing their questions? Do they feel comfortable posing questions? So I think in that remote environment, if for some reason we're not in a conference room together, there's more intention of reaching out to the staff throughout the day, throughout the audit, throughout the project to touch base and see, hey, how is this going? Do you have questions? Have you ran into issues? Are there items popping up that you're not sure how to handle? And so it creates that intentionality.
Yes, that's great. Well, Justin, at this time, we'd like to do some fun, rapid-fire style questions to get to know you on a more personal level. So if you have to wear a T-shirt with one word on it for a year, what word would that be and why?
If I could only pick one word, I think what I would want to pick is integrity. And the reason I say that is, I hope that throughout my life, the people I've interacted with and the people I'll continue to interact with into the future, when they walk away, no matter what's happened, I hope that they can look at me and say that they felt like I acted with integrity. Because at the end of the day, no matter what I'm working on, I'm trying to be, as real as I can be. And so I think that integrity just holds up across the board. And so I think that's the word that I would pick if I could only have one to wear on a T-shirt for a year.
Okay. If you could not work for a year, what would you do?
I think it'd be a combination of two things. I absolutely love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 10 years now. It's a great workout. It's great stress relief. I've met a lot of really neat people, neat and just genuine people through that process. And so if I could not work for a year, I think it'd be a lot of fun to travel around the world, sightsee, and at the same time be able to visit different jiu-jitsu schools kind of throughout the world and meet those people and see the techniques that they work and how they train their individuals and kind of get to know individuals through that culture and through that group of people.
I didn't know that about you, Justin. That's really interesting.
Oh, I love it. It's so much fun.
Well, Justin, I just really appreciate you being here today to talk us through what you've done in remote auditing and remote service delivery. And we at Convergence Coaching we're big believers in virtual work and flexible work. And we're big believers in this is the direction that things are heading. And so I appreciate you kind of being out front, leading us and talking about how your firm is approaching it.
Yeah, happy to do that. That's not a problem at all.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Convergence Coaching Inspired Ideas podcast. Be sure to visit convergencecoaching.com to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. Have an inspired day.